Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking about some future card Buddyfight stuff, and today's topic is going to be generic cards. So generic cards are a special type of cards in Buddyfight, and actually, apparently, according to a ruling, they do count under Worlds, but that's a whole other topic. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about generic cards and their usage and why you would use them, and going over a lot of the popular generic cards, especially now in Ace with a lot of the powerful decks out there, and cards you need, some cards you want, and what they do against certain decks, and, you know, their proper usage and stuff like that. Anyways, so let's talk about the sideboard. So the sideboard is basically a board of 10 cards you have on the side, pretty self-explanatory. And in competitive Buddyfight, and I know sometimes in Japan they do this, but especially for official Bushiroad events, you can side them out in game 2 and 3. So basically, let's say you had these generic cards on the side, you can put them into your deck if you take a card out, essentially. And this can be for Lost World or for your regular deck, and of course the 4-card rule still applies. So we're going to be talking about some generic cards, as already said. So the first one is Gambit. Now Gambit has been around since the very first set of Buddyfight, and this card is incredible because it allows you to bounce cards back to your hand, only your field as well. If it was opponent's field, it might be good as well. But anyways, it allows you to basically do that and reuse any cards that have on-enter effects. For example, Garcat, a lot of the cards like I think Amos, and back in the day, the Searcher. So things like that allow you to reuse their on-enter effects, and that is really abusable, and this has actually resulted in some loops. Currently, Gambit is still only limited to 1. It hasn't actually been straight up banned, like Obstruct. And Obstruct is another card I want to talk about because it was really, I don't want to say bad. It wasn't a bad card, obviously, but it was really bad for gameplay and just for having fun because it basically just denied draws for both players, and that was really annoying, and it did leave the player that had already gone first and drawn before they casted the spell to be at a huge advantage, and Bushiroad didn't like that and is unhealthy for the game, so they've straight up banned it. So yeah, if you have it around, it's not going to probably be worth much, especially because it's banned, but yeah, you can't use it anymore. So, moving on to the next card, we have Loyalty. Now, Loyalty is a really strong card because basically its third effect. It stops cards from basically being spammed, from calling monsters multiple times. So, it's basically cast in response, and then they can't call the 4th monster or other ones. Again, if you actually do this in response to the 4th call, it actually doesn't work. I got this mixed up before, but you usually do it in response to the 3rd call, and then they have to think about, okay, well, I can't call anything else for this turn, so I decide. And it's really great against certain decks that spam call a lot. For example, Folktale and Garga. Loyalty is kind of a little controversial one in my eyes, but it is still a really good card. It also has the reduced 2 damage by effects, so you can use it defensively, and it can also remove soul as well. So 3-in-1 is just a really good card, and the 1 gauge isn't too big of an issue for most decks. And of course, we have Buddy Block. Now, Buddy Block is definitely one of the big cards that we finally got in English, and people are absolutely excited about it. And it's a really good card. So basically, if your opponent's cards have attacked 4 times or more, so you usually use this in response to the 4th attack, then you basically don't take any damage by attacks for the rest of the turn. Now, granted, it doesn't stop effect damage. It's still really good and shuts down a lot of aggro decks, even though certain decks, like let's say Garga, can still hit you with the Punisher or something. It's still a really solid card, and also has reduced 3 damage by effect, which is your other alternative, because just choose one of the following 2. Anyways, moving on, we have Recovery Veil. Now, Recovery Veil was a new card that we got a while back, which we finally are getting in English for shop challenges and for Springfest, but that is the way you obtain as a promo. In Japan, it was really good because it has 2 effects, and also has a continuous effect in your hand. So you can basically reveal it if you'd have to discard cards in your hand and pay a life, and you just don't discard the card. Your hand basically doesn't get affected at all by the drop effect, and this is really good because especially against Godpunks and any decks, even 72 Pillar for example, because they have the Osmodite that discards, you don't have to do anything against that, and it basically makes you immune if you sub it in. So it is really good, and also has the alternative of choose one of the 2 effects. You either get to gauge 2, so generic Dragonic Charge for like basically every deck is really good, or you can either reduce the damage by attack to 0, and that is really good. Although there are some decks that do have effects that that stop reduction, it's still a really good card either way. And again, that gauge 2 is sometimes really helpful to certain decks. Okay, moving on, we have Time Sale. Now, Time Sale was a card introduced in New World Chaos. It's kind of your generic draw card, which is very pricey. It's 2 gauge 2 left to draw 2, which is sometimes teched in at like 1 or 2 just for the extra draw power. You might see in some decks, especially those that don't have it available to them. And it is actually free if you have 3 life or less. You don't have to pay the cost and get the draw 2. So it is still really nice because you can basically put it in any deck. And a lot of decks that have the extra gauge, or maybe just need a little bit more draw power, it's pretty great at doing that. And speaking of that, you also have the other card, Buddy Help. Now, Buddy Help is basically the same thing, 3 gauge draw 2. And of course, I don't know if this is official meme out there, but you can't Buddy Help in Chaos. Chaos and Thunder Empire Fangs don't actually allow you to use generic cards. The 100 Demons Parade flag and Dragonine do, but those 2 flags don't. So essentially, don't use generic cards in Chaos and Thunder Empire. People will flame you for it. I'm just gonna say that. Anyways, Buddy Help is also an interesting card if you got extra gauge. Pay 3 gauge, draw 2. Unfortunately, spell nulls are out there, so if you pay 3 gauge and then they null it, well, that's quite unfortunate. But it's still a really great card either way. And if you have the gauge, you have the extra stuff, then you can throw it in. Most of the time, you don't really see it as much because time sale is a better option, or ace decks just have the draw power available to them, or resource grabbing. But yeah. Other than that, it's still a pretty awesome card to keep in mind, especially if you need to throw it into a deck. You also have Gurubumbuku. Now, this was a card introduced in X, and it is actually a monster with a discard from effects. You basically discard a pay gauge, you give power plus 3000, penetrate, move, and I think, yeah, defense 3000 power, defense and power, and a critical 1 and penetrate and move. Pretty sure I got that right. If I got it wrong, well, then you could just see the card on screen right now and see it for yourself. But it's really interesting because it's basically generic move and extra buffs to any card. Granted, you do have to discard it from your hand, but I also saw this really interesting being used with Max Dragons, because what you can do is go into Lost World, move it, and then if you want to call the Lost Monsters, you can instead call out the new, what was it called? The one that's 10 gauge to call with Vile Vortex, and still have that as your solid defense. So I know some people are testing with that. I think this was a thing in Japan builds, but yeah, Gurubumbuku is an interesting card, and you can pair it up with other things that multi-attacks to get some extra damage output. Okay, let's talk about a few other interesting cards. Just 2 more that I want to have a look at. First off, Ultimate Buddy. Ultimate Buddy card that I have, I think, talked about before. As you see on screen now, it's basically 1 gauge, throw it into your buddy's soul and gives it Soul Guard and extra power. This is useful for some stuff, and I don't think it's really used as much now in the current Ace meta, but it's still an interesting card. Maybe you might want to keep in the back of your head later for new releases and decks. But yeah, you basically just chuck into Soul, you give it Soul Guard. Cards that already have Soul Guard are basically just get an extra Soul, or cards that don't, you can maybe make up and create some really interesting effects and not loops, but combos to say. So moving on, we have another interesting card. Buddy Option. Now, Buddy Option was a card we got as a promo, and unfortunately it is a box topper, so it is really hard to find. Basically, it allows you to do either give 5000 power and penetrate to a monster in your field, or throw it into soul of a monster item on your field, and basically gives you ability null prevention to every card on your field, which is really good. And most of the decks already have ability null. That's why you don't see people playing stars in certain decks, because it's pretty much just an immunity out there. It's still really interesting, and back in the day, ability null was still really strong. Now, not so much with everything out there, but Buddy Option is still a good card to keep in mind, especially to seal up decks, for example, like Val Soleil, the new one with triple attack, to kind of seal up those certain weaknesses. You also have another interesting card, which I wanted to talk about, 3 more. Field Canceller. This one I'm seeing for Venom Dragons, which is interesting. I don't know how to feel about it, but this is just something to, I don't know, maybe you want to try it out for yourself. I haven't personally tested it. It's 2 gauge, discard a card from your hand. You basically pop all your sets, so you can use the ability of Venom Swamp to mill your opponent's deck, even though you usually want to use it on attack first because it's not a counter. It's still an interesting card, so I just wanted to bring it up. Another card, Remove, which is basically 1 gauge and remove up to 2 souls. Pretty self-explanatory from the name. Really good against certain decks like MAT. I was thinking about it maybe in Draw Metal, just because you can remove Soul and then bounce, pop, or whatever, and then oppress their areas. Especially when you have certain decks that like to stack a lot of Soul and put them on the side. Like, you're not going to run into Raging Spirits, but it's an interesting card nonetheless, and it was pretty relevant back in, I think, 100 or so you might want to keep the card in mind just because it's interesting. And again, another old one, Barbed Wire. Barbed Wire was a really great card back then just because it's rest an item for free. Now there's a lot better options in Ace, obviously, but that's a card I want to bring out. And also Scalebinder. Surprisingly, this card came back because a lot of cards at the beginning of Ace, especially during this year's regionals, for example, Vanity, Garga, Agito, Cross, a lot of the cards had double attack or penetrate, and this was an easy free rest, even though some decks did have the anti-rest. It was still really good, and especially MAT, because MAT will easily OTK you if you cannot stop that first attack. They just throw, I forgot the name of the weapon, the one that gives 3000 in crit +1 and penetrate, hit you for 5, use their impact, and you're just dead in 1 turn. There's nothing you can do, so Skillbinder helps you to rest, stop that first attack, so yeah, it basically prevents the OTKs from MAT and can be useful in a lot of scenarios because you can just stop multi-attackers or certain options. Granted, anti-rest is still a thing. So yeah, that is pretty much it for generic cards. Hopefully I've basically covered everything. A lot of the ones that I talked about at the beginning are the ones you'll definitely recognize and see that a lot of players are looking for, especially loyalty. And Recovery Veil is definitely going to be one that's going to be really sought out as well. So yeah, generic cards are interesting. Sorry for this video if it's a bit too long. I know I haven't really been uploading much, but I will get to that immediately. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this, especially for those who aren't really too much into competitive Buddyfight, and really want to learn more. So if you have any things you want to actually ask about for competitive Buddyfight, or maybe you want to see more of, then feel free to ask it. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you later in the next video.